Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. Using different scale sounds is a great way to introduce some variation and some new colors in your own solo while you're playing. In this video I want to show you how you can use 7 different scale sounds on a minor chord. So it's a tonic minor chord, which means a song in a minor key or maybe a sort of a minor chord in a modal situation. And I'm going to go over each of them, talk a little bit about what that specific color is, and show you how I use them in my playing. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes, checking out some interesting arpeggios or chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. First sound is the melodic minor scale. I think the melodic minor scale is probably sort of the most essential minor scale in jazz. It's the one that you'll find used most often, and it's also probably the only one you'll find used in some genres like especially bebop and hard bop. It's also a big part of more modern jazz because with the melodic minor sound we've also moved it into other chord types like the Lydian augmented and the altered and the Lydian dominant. In this case I'm using it on a static C minor chord because that's just a good example of how it works as a minor sound. It's all the examples in this video are in C, so it's a C minor chord. So the scale I'm using is just a C melodic minor scale, so C, D, E flat, F, G, A, and B. The characteristic notes here are really found at the end of the scale. So that's the major 7 and the major 6. That combination is really the sound of this chord, and that's also what you will be using when you're improvising. So tapping into when you have the major 7, you immediately get this augmented sound. So you have those kind of triads, and the major 6 also gives you a 4th degree that's a major chord. So you kind of have those together. So you can actually turn that into a triad pair. I did use that, I think, in the solo. So so there's an E flat augmented and an F major triad together. And of course, I've made a lot of videos on what you can use from the melodic minor scale, so I'm not really going to go into too many details about it. Now you have an idea about what it sounds like, and also that if you're playing with it and you want to emphasize that sound, that you want to have, of course you want to say that it's minor, so you probably want to play the 3rd, but at the same time you want to really lean on the major 6 and the major 7. And in that way get that sound across. The harmonic minor scale is maybe sort of the black sheep when it comes to our tonic minor sounds, because we all check out the scale and we all use it, but we don't really use it too much on tonic minor chords. And it is also maybe a little bit difficult to use it to play sort of straight, more bop oriented stuff, but at the same time it is really a great sound to get into and use. Especially when I play it like in a solo like this, I think it's actually a really great sound to use once in a while to just create really a different atmosphere and get a little bit away from the sounds that you hear all the time. So for that it's probably a little bit underused, I think. If we just look at the scale, so it's really the same as harmonic minor, except that now we have a flat 6, so that means it's C, D, E flat, F, G, and then A flat, and then B. And that means that we have the major 7. See if I play a chord on that, like this. So, but we also have a flat 6, so we have that large interval in the scale, which is a minor 3rd or an augmented 2nd if you want to be theoretically correct about it. And you can do a lot of nice stuff with it. I think it's really about leaning, and that's also the thing with this scale sound. The melodic minor scale sound is really something where all the notes sound good and they will fit with a chord, and you can kind of just stay on them. You don't really have any notes that you have to watch out with. And when you're playing harmonic minor, then we have the flat 6, which doesn't necessarily sound great on the chord, at least if you're playing like this, that's something that wants to resolve. But you can also really use that in your lines and really go. So really use the fact that we have this note that is going to give us some tension, and we need to work with it in a certain way, especially for modal situation. That works really well. So if you're playing a standard with a longer period of some sort of tonic minor, like All or Nothing at All or Invitation. Harmonic minor is the minor scale sound that we use too little. And probably Dorian is the one that we're using too much. I think pretty much everybody who doesn't know what to do with any kind of minor chord will probably just play Dorian on it, because that seems to be sort of the safe vanilla choice to do. And the way we play Dorian is maybe a little bit problematic in that respect, because we're used to playing Dorian coming from thinking of it as a mode. So of course, in this case, C minor Dorian is the second mode of B flat major. In this case it's C, D, E flat, F, G, A and B flat. And the characteristic notes we have here is a combination of having a major 6 and a minor 7. And most of the time when we're playing this, then we're thinking about the Dorian sound. It's actually in the context of a B flat major, and very often it's in the context of a B flat major cadence. And in that case, it maybe doesn't really make too much sense to think about that chord as being Dorian, because that's not really how that sound works. It's not someplace, it's in the middle of a progression, and try to make it sound really Dorian, then you're kind of ruining the chord progression. So there are things there where modes and tonal harmony don't really fit too well. So if you really want to have the Dorian sound out there, then you want to have the sound of these two notes. And I think I pretty much go for that right from the beginning of the solo that I played. So really just trying to get especially since the comping will usually anyway have the minor 7, then you can really just aim for that major 6 and try and get that out. But also if you can make lines that sort of combine the two, then that works well as well. I think if you listen to, as an example of somebody who does use the Dorian sound like that, Wes Montgomery on Smoking at the Half Note, when he's playing on Impressions, and this is from memory, I could be wrong, but I think something like this. That might not be the right phrase, but at least he's really emphasizing this major 6. And in this case, because the piano player is playing the minor 7, you really get that minor 13 sound. In the same way that you'll also see how Herbie Hancock is using minor 13 chords also in cadences with Miles, when they're sort of slowing everything down so it becomes modal when they're playing standards. The Aeolian sound is another sound that's not used too much in jazz. I think you'll find it used quite a lot in metal and also in folk music, actually. That's also the sort of the associations I have with it. I really use sound associations a lot when I'm trying to improvise with these scales, because that's really what I'm trying to use them for. I'm not really thinking about what the notes are. I want to do that when I'm practicing. What I end up having is some sort of association that I can tap into, that I want to use when I'm soloing, and that I want to put into the music, I guess. And that here becomes especially sort of a folk sound. So the Aeolian scale is of course just C, D, E flat, F, G, and then A flat and B flat. So it's a flat 6 and it's a flat 7. That also kind of means that we have, we get the A flat. That's not a note that we can really sustain or keep on the C minor chord. So that kind of needs to resolve. And the B flat is a little bit in some ways also a sort of tension, but but has less of a need to resolve in the way it had in a Dorian scale. So so in that way, it's a more open and more, for me, more folk-ish sounds, I guess. And really, I tend to play it a lot more, as you can tell, a lot more simple. Also, it's not a scale where I'm. Well, that's of course just me personally, but it's not a scale where I'm using all the difficult, large arpeggios and stuff. That doesn't mean that it's not possible, but it's not the kind of sound that I expect to use it for. It's not what I'm hearing when I. Scale and the blues sound is probably something that you'll find some people say that they don't want to use because they feel that they've sort of passed that and that's a beginning thing to do. But really, it is a sound. It's actually also a huge part of jazz to play blues, so it's also something that's worthwhile checking out. And it's a great sound to put in a lot of places. Just listen to, well, pretty much any Joe Pass record or any Papithini record for that matter. So you'll find really diverse versions of the blues being used. And it makes sense to also have that in there. The way that I play it now would be just the C, E flat, F, and then also with the blue note. So the G flat or F sharp, G, B flat. It doesn't really contain any notes that are so interesting. I think it's not, of course the F sharp is there, but we're only using it as a leading note. It's a certain type of phrasing, and in that way it's a certain type of sound. And that's actually what we're looking for, right? We're trying to come up with some scales to help us get different sounds, and this way of playing is maybe giving you, just in terms of phrasing, a different sound. And in that way it works well to have as a sound that you can use in a tonic minor situation. This sound is probably not what you're going to find in the chord progression that you're soloing on. So this is more in the special effects department, something that you put on top of a minor chord when you've played on a few choruses, for instance, on a minor blues or something like that. It's a great sound for that because it is really a few sort of quirky sounds in there. So the Dorian sharp 4 sound, which this is C, D, E flat, F sharp, G, A, and B flat. So of course just the Dorian scale with a sharp 4. You can also look at this as being the 4th mode of G harmonic minor. The reason why you would want to do that is of course that you probably know G harmonic minor a lot better than thinking about something which is Dorian and then with a raised 4. Because you have that sharp 4 sound, then the sharp 4 on a minor 7 chord is of course not the kind of chord that you're gonna run into every day. So that's just a nice sound to tap into, and you can use that. I think the stuff that I'm doing with the solo here is really also just trying to tap into that sound and really emphasize the sharp 4. You can do that with some of the triad pairs that are so typical for harmonic minor. So the D, E flat thing also works well because you have the D, which is kind of going to be all the nice extensions on your C minor. So the 9, the sharp 11, and the major 13. And then you have sort of the E flat, which is just the basic chord. So in that way you kind of have a nice triad pair that's going to give you the sound of the Dorian sharp 4 quite well. Play something that's really C minor, and then all of a sudden you can introduce this D major triad, because the major triads is such a strong sound melodically also, that you can just introduce that on top of a C minor, and that will sort of sound kind of as if it's coming from out of nowhere. That's the great thing about this sound. C minor scale that I'm using here is really out there in the sense that it doesn't even contain a C, because the scale that I'm using is an augmented scale. So there are a few ways to sort of think about this. If you think about this from coming from sort of a tonic C minor, like a C minor, then of course the top part of a C minor major is an E flat augmented scale. So then you can sort of in that way connect the augmented scale to C. So this would be an E flat augmented scale that I'm using over a C minor chord. And actually it works for C minor. It will work for C minor 7 as well, in the sense that, well, it works. It doesn't really fit, but it doesn't fit in the way that we want it to not fit, I guess. Because you could also just look at a C minor 7 and say, well, I want to only look at the E flat major triad, that's the upper structure of that, and then I'm going to use the augmented scale that's in there. That's just another way of connecting it to it. It's really just to sort of have an excuse to use it, almost. But that is a little bit how it's connected in terms of sound, and how I'm arriving at using exactly this augmented scale over a C minor chord. So the scale is, of course, just if I play it from, well, let's play it from the third because it's an E flat augmented scale then. So there's an E flat, F sharp, G, B flat, B, and then D, and then E flat again. I've made other videos on the augmented scale. I think that the main thing to remember with this scale is that it is a symmetrical scale. I think in the solo that I played right now, I wasn't using the symmetrical thing that much, but I did try to get some of that in there because it's a huge part of how I use it also. But it's also just interesting to see what you can come up with if you just play the scale. Because the other way of using it, where you're thinking more from a sort of symmetrical point of view, is to use the structures that are in there. And that's a very powerful thing to do with the scale, because it's symmetrical in major thirds. So E flat down to a B down to a G major. And you can use all these as sort of sounds that you put on top of. If you just listen to sort of the C minor sound of the chord, really basic C minor, and then you have this on top, so E flat, and then the B or the G, and that's a little bit how I'm also using a lot. So you can do the, let's see, that was I think I kind of played this. These are sort of typical runs from this scale that you can experiment with, and the idea is just to have sort of a small island of one sound and then the next sound, and it's because it's symmetrical, it makes sense, I guess. If there's a scale that you use really a lot when you're improvising over minor chords, and I didn't cover it in this video, then leave a comment. I know I'm curious, and I'm pretty sure that everybody else who's checking out the video are also interested in getting more ideas and getting some inspiration for coming up with some new scale sounds. So in that way we can all learn something. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. The videos that I publish here every week are on finding some solid methods and good strategies to explore all the great things about jazz guitar and improvising. If you like this video and you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. I'm very grateful for the support that I'm getting from my patrons, and it's because of that I can keep on publishing videos every week. If you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for all your support. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.